Ladies and gentlemen, if you have not met John yet this morning, you have not tried. He will have all of you met by the end of the morning, I'm sure. He is one of the great inside voices of Washington, D.C., one of the voices of clarity. Please welcome Mr. John Gizzi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Let me just dispel a rumor right now. I haven't been in Washington as long as Washington, but I will say I was a technical advisor on the movie Lincoln.
Very good. There you go.
All right. It is so nice to be back here in Harrisburg and to be with all of my friends. You know, Lowman Henry asks me every year without fail to come and speak to you. And sure enough, this year, as I was in the process of changing venues for reporting, he called me and he said, "Now, John, I know you're going through an important change, but do you believe in the Constitution?" Well, I said, "Yes, of course." He said, "Do you believe in the Bill of Rights?" I said, "Sure, Lowman." He said, "Do you believe in freedom of speech?" I said, "With all my heart." He says, "Then will you come to the PLC again and give a speech for free?" So here I am. But I don't really need a lot of convincing from Lowman or Fred or anyone. This is like coming home for me. Fred Anton will tell you that I was with him at the very first PLC back in 1989, the first time I ever came to Harrisburg. And I made so many good friends then. Many are here today, some Jim Panyard, Charlie Giroux, Bob Walker couldn't be here. But PLC has been a very big part of my life, and I've been coming so often, I feel like I could be a registered voter here. But I guess I can't. You have voter ID now. And again, the friends I've made are very important. I do feel at home. It reminds me of the story of John the 23rd when he became Pope in 1958. John was the first Pope to have an audience with American members of Congress. And one of them, Brooke Hayes of Arkansas, said in an awkward manner, "Your Holiness, I just want you to know I'm a Baptist." And the Pope smiled and said, "Well, we should get along great. I'm John." And, well, I'm John too, and we do get along great. You know, we live in a 24-hour news cycle. And when I was at Human Events and now with Newsmax, for me that meant dropping whatever I was doing when I wanted to do something to file a story, sometimes at some very ungodly hours, just as though I could work on it, make sure it was accurate, and above all, get it posted. For you, it means something else. The 24-hour news cycle means that you get to see stories up close and personal. And most importantly, as political activists, you get a front row seat at the bumper crop of political leaders for conservatives in the 21st century. And it's a pretty good seat to have. Let me give you some examples from just this past week. On Wednesday last, at 3 a.m. in the wee hours, the language of the immigration reform bill was dropped in the offices of our elected representatives and senators in Washington, D.C. All 1,500 pages of it. 1,500 pages of it. You know, there was talk last night about requiring members of Congress to read the bills before they vote on it. I actually have a better idea. Why don't we simply limit the length of legislation to 4,052 words, the same number of words in the Constitution of the United States? That may come later. For now, lawmakers are dealing with the 1,500 pages in the immigration reform bill. And it's really not important at this point what's in it. That legislation is going to be bartered, bargained, amended, and compromised so much that when and if there's a vote, you may not recognize it from the original version. Already, Congressman Lamar Smith of Texas, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, has said he will not consider any of the reforms until the House deals first with border security. And in this whole process, what's most important to me, even more important than the bill itself, is the person who helps sculpt it, who champions it, who argues it over and over to the point of going at length with Rush Limbaugh on his radio program. And when it was over, the Grand Talkmeister himself, sorry Gary, said, "I like the man a lot, but I don't get the bill." He was talking, of course, about Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who takes a controversial issue, refuses to sit by idly, does something about it, and he doesn't expect you to like what he has to say, but you end up liking him because he answers any and all questions about it and does it very, very well. And I think the same could be said about Pennsylvania's own Senator Pat Toomey. Look, I was here yesterday. The most talked about issue has been the Manchin-Toomey compromise on background checks. We heard what the senator had to say, and I know a lot of people disagreed with him, but at the very least, one has to respect the Keystone State's junior senator and someone we all know very well for at least addressing a controversial issue and trying to do something about it and coming back to explain it to his friends, his base, the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference. And if you still disagree with him, at least you can say, well, isn't it impressive that the Keystone State has a senator who's become a character on Saturday Night Live? One assignment that I very much enjoyed last year was going out to the state of Wisconsin and covering the race that the whole world was watching, from the BBC to the venerable French publication Le Figaro. And that, of course, was the recall of Governor Scott Walker. Here is a state that's hemorrhaging in red ink, and the governor simply asked, and then required by law, that some public sector employees pay a small portion of their retirement and health care benefits. I might add a smaller portion than in most private sector jobs. And there was an exclusion for firefighters and policemen as well. For this, Governor Walker was vilified. When I arrived in Madison, I saw posters likening him to the Godfather. He became one of the most hated figures in the liberal media. And through it all, he survived the recall. And one would think this is someone who had every right to seek vengeance and take names and numbers. What did he do within a week of his survival back in June? Governor Walker invited all of the Democrats in the state legislature who had tried to remove him from office to a fish fry at the governor's mansion to discuss issues they could agree on, like school vouchers and charter schools. And I presume they served cheese there as well. In the process, he gave new meaning to the phrase, "no hard feelings," and "forgive as we forgive." The common denominator in all of this is that the issues are very much still on our side. Some call conservative issues shop-worn. I call them timeless. All they need is a better messenger to market the message. And when one looks at a Rubio, a Toomey, a Walker, and certainly those who are going to lead on the issue of the war on terror, something we're going to hear, I think our cause is in pretty good shape right now. And just last month, we saw what can happen when someone can articulate an issue well and sell a message and make people like him without changing his principles at all. You know who I mean, the person who caught all our imaginations, Pope Francis. Think about it for a moment. I so loved it when my former colleague in the White House press corps, Norah O'Donnell of CBS Morning News, said minutes after the election of Cardinal Jorge Bergoglio, he is, and I quote, ultra-conservative and ultra-orthodox. But that didn't stop a lot of people who had left his church long ago from coming back in long lines, at least in Washington, D.C., to attend Easter services. And it didn't stop people from other faiths who had severe disagreements with those of Pope Francis to come to his coronation and sit down and talk to him. They may not have liked the message, but they liked him. And that's a good first start toward winning any kind of debate that's out there. So let's talk a little politics. We've got what I consider the most important midterm election, at least that I've seen in my 33 years of covering politics. When I was a kid, I hated people who said when I was a kid. Now I say it all the time. When I was a young reporter, campaigns were short, they were dignified. Now, just as we're in a 24-hour news cycle, we're in a 24-hour, 12 months a year campaign cycle. There are 35 U.S. Senate seats up for election next year, 21 in Democratic hands, 14 held by Republicans. 5 Democrats are retiring. The 6th, John Kerry, has resigned to become Secretary of State. And 2 Republicans are retiring, both in states that I'm pretty sure will keep a Republican senator on the job. In contrast, all of the open Democratic seats are fair game for a good Republican challenger. Put another way, after so much disappointment in the Senate elections of 2012, we're given a second chance to win control. Let's hope that we don't blow it with a lot of internecine warfare and arguments in our sister states and in sister movements to the PLC. It wouldn't happen in Pennsylvania, as Tom Smith could give testimony to. In the House of Representatives, the Washington Post reported in a page-1 story on March 3rd that President Obama and his political organization, Organizing for America, were focusing on 17 House seats presently in Republican hands for targeting and for extinction of the incumbent Republican. 2 of these are going to be in Pennsylvania, I'm sure, Mike Fitzpatrick in Bucks County and Keith Rothfuss out in western Pennsylvania. Narrow winners last time. I might add that the figure 17 is important because these districts will be in area that President Obama carried last time, but which nonetheless sent a Republican to Congress. So it's not hard to figure out who the targets are. In contrast, there are only 9 Democratic-held seats in the House that are in districts carried by Mitt Romney. You can do the math, and I certainly don't have to tell you the importance of the races that are out there for the House. The Republican control of the House of Representatives, as Steve Hayes made clear last night, is the last line of defense for us guys. If we fail to hold the House, if we complain about votes that Mike Fitzpatrick has made, or don't work hard enough for Keith Rothfuss or some of the others, then we will see Nancy Pelosi as Speaker again, and we will deserve every anti-gun, high-tax, high-spending government expansion vote that we are going to get. And rest assured, we are going to get them. So I think it's not exaggeration, and it's certainly not hyperbole to underscore the importance of the coming race and the importance of working for candidates and putting our best messenger up front and very visible to all those who can see. We've got some difficult days ahead. Certainly that's the case in Pennsylvania. Governor Corbett made a lot of changes. He kept his promises. He's going to have a difficult time getting reelected. There's no doubt about it. And then, of course, retaining the congressmen and the members of the legislature. You've got your work cut out for you. But just remember, your ideas will live on. Just look for the best messenger out there. And when you're down and when it seems the cause won't go on, think about the 700 people who are here for this conference. Think about the enthusiasm that's shared, and recall a poem of somebody who was down and out in his luck and for whom the future seemed hopeless. Nguyen Thi Chien was a North Vietnamese poet who wrote and spoke out against the communist regime in Hanoi. For his troubles, he was jailed, tortured to the limit of human endurance, denied even a pen and paper in jail, he nonetheless had a much better repository for his verse, his memory. And when he was finally released, all the 400 poems that he had committed to memory, he wrote down on paper. He stuffed them in his clothes. And then he proceeded to go out and make a disturbance at the British embassy in Hanoi, knowing full well that the British guards would arrest him, that they would search him, and that his poems and his words would go out throughout the world. And one of those poems I'd like to share with you this morning. They exiled me to the jungle in the hope that my remains would fertilize the grass. But I became a big game hunter, full of snake wisdom and rhino fierceness. They sank me into the deepest ocean in the hopes that I would remain in the depths. But I became a deep-sea diver and came up covered with scintillating pearls. On October 2nd, Nguyen Chai Thien died in Westminster, California, at last a free man in a free country. Let his words live on with us as we proceed in the important cause and campaign ahead of us. Let us face our opponents with snake wisdom and rhino fierceness. And come November of 2014, I assure you, you will emerge with scintillating pearls, a victory in the midterm elections. As Pennsylvania conservatives, you can do no less. Thank you, and God bless you all.
John Gizzi, ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause, would you please? Now, I'm going to ask Connor and Brittney to come up to the stage here. We're going to do a quick transition right around to the front, and we're going to get started with our panel discussion. Brittney Morrett was raised in central Pennsylvania and received a AA from Bard College at Simon's Rock in Massachusetts, then graduated with a BA in Middle East Studies from the George Washington University in 2010. After graduation, Brittney went on to be the communications manager for campusreform.org, the Leadership Institute's grassroots mobilization site for conservative college students. Brittney currently works as the Youth Projects Manager for the Libra Initiative, a nonpartisan nonprofit that promotes economic freedom to the U.S. Hispanic community. Brittney occasionally speaks at events like Right Online and various conservative panels, summits regarding politics from youth and minority outreach to effective activism. This year, she was an MC at CPAC and has been published in The Guardian, NBC Latino, and The Daily Caller, in addition to being on several radio programs in the USA and Canada. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present to you Brittney Morrett. Connor J. Kurtz was elected in 2011 to represent Amity Township on the Daniel Boone Area School Board while still a senior in high school. Connor campaigned on a conservative platform advocating for responsible government and lower taxes. Voters found his honesty, dedication to education, and unique perspective refreshing. In May of 2011, Connor, we don't want to get you a bad word there, Congress. Connor won the nominations for both the Republican and Democratic parties in a competitive four-way primary. Connor has been a clarion voice for conservative principles for the Daniel Boone School Board and in Berks County. In addition to serving on the school board, he also serves on the board of directors of the Berks County Intermediate Unit, the executive committee of the Berks Earned Income Tax Bureau, and is a committee man with the Berks GOP. He is currently a freshman at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Ladies and gentlemen, Connor J. Kurtz. Our format here this morning, we're going to have Brittney and Connor each make about a 6 to 7 minute presentation. Then we're going to have a discussion on some of our questions on thoughts about leadership and activism. But we'll start out with Brittney this morning. Brittney?
Good morning. I want to thank all of you for being here. I know it's a bit early and I'm finding this room a bit chilly, so if I stutter or hear my teeth chattering, forgive me. But first I want to thank Loman. I'm not sure where you are, but thank you for inviting me to participate. I really do appreciate it. I also want to thank Scott Davis for being so supportive over the past few years. And if you haven't taken his straw poll, make sure to do so. But thank both of them. I wouldn't be here speaking today if it wasn't for those two gentlemen. And so Loman asked me to come speak about why I'm a young Hispanic conservative. And I started thinking about that, how did I become a conservative? And growing up in a single-parent home in Harrisburg, I never remembered my mother talking about legislation, talking about various issues like abortion or gun control. We did go to church on Sundays, but there was never political discussion, I guess, growing up when I was very little. And I just remember being instilled with this idea of hard work and responsibility. I was told from a very young age that nobody owed me anything, and that if I wanted something, I had to work for it, and that I had to earn it. And as soon as I turned 15, I think that's when you can apply for a work permit, I went out and I got a job, and I have had at least one job since then. And I think it was in high school I started getting interested in politics, and conservatism just seemed like a natural fit, a natural home. I looked at the two platforms and what the two movements were offering, and it seemed like a clear choice. I am conservative for the same reasons that you are conservative. I value my freedoms. I value limited government, free market, traditional values. So you'll never hear me say that to expand the movement, we need to water down our principles, because we don't. There's nothing wrong with our principles. You'll never hear me say that to expand our movement to include other demographics that we need to pander, because we don't. That being said, there are several things that we do need to do. And I wanted to talk about why I was a young conservative, but like I said, you know why I'm a conservative. It's the same reasons as you. So I just wanted to take a few minutes. Being a young conservative who, as was mentioned, I work in the Latino community on a day-to-day basis, not with conservatives. I'm working with young Latinos between the ages of 16 and 26, trying to change hearts and minds. And so I'm hearing their thoughts on conservatism and why they're not conservatives. And most often the reason is they don't know what conservative principles are. How can we expect these demographics, which we did so horribly with in 2012, how can we expect them to embrace conservatism when they've never been introduced to it? I go into these communities in Texas, Chicago, New York City, Miami, you name it, they don't know what economic freedom is. They don't know what we mean by limited government. And so the first thing that I would say is that we need to start engaging. We need to get out of our comfort zone. It's great to be a warrior on Twitter, but it's not reaching the people that we need to reach. So I would say that if you take anything away from what I have to say, please go out and be active. Go out into these communities. Go out to Allison Hill in Harrisburg. Go out to Opelika in southern Florida, to Washington Heights in New York City. Go to these people where conservatives are not normally seen and start spreading the conservative message. Do community service. Become invested in these communities to show that we care. We are the compassionate movement. And I think a lot of times people forget that. We're often portrayed as this movement of old white men who don't care, and that's not true. The other movement is the movement that doesn't care. However, one of the things that I do find problematic with our movement is messaging. We have a really hard time marketing our principles. We're marketing freedom. That is our principle, conservative, traditional values. We need to understand, though, that people digest information differently. You wouldn't explain sound money supply the same way to a 65-year-old white woman from Omaha, Nebraska, as you would to a 19-year-old Cuban from Miami. You just wouldn't. There are different frames of reference, cultural influences. We need to take that into account when we're marketing our values. There are a lot of hot-button issues, and a lot of pundits are throwing red meat and trying to out-hardline each other instead of trying to find workable solutions. Now again, I'm not saying to water down our principles, and I'm not saying to pander, but when you have someone doing a get-off-my-lawn type rhetoric, it's an instant non-starter. When someone is screaming, everything is amnesty, you're going to lose the Latino vote, because almost every Latino knows someone who's affected by immigration. So whether they agree with you or not on whether you should secure the border and go through various immigration steps, if the rhetoric is so toxic, they're not going to listen. And we can't win without expanding the movement. We've seen the numbers last night. It's just not going to happen. So I ask you, remember, we are the compassionate movement. We're talking to other human beings. We know that conservatism is the best for everyone. That's why we're here at 7 in the morning, because we know that conservative principles work. So I ask you to remember that when you are out there talking about immigration, talking about tax reform, limited government, and entitlement reform, that think about how you're sounding, because perception is a really big part of what's going to move us forward and expand.
Thank you very much, Brittney. Connor.
Thank you very much. It's such an absolute privilege to be here this morning with so many conservatives. I go to school in Washington, D.C., and it's nice to be with a welcome crowd. So thank you for being here, and thank you for allowing me to come here and speak. I really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity. I'd like to take a little bit of time to explain why I am a conservative. And like Brittney said, we all are conservatives, and we do know it's because it makes sense. Conservatism favors limited government. It favors liberty. It's a movement of independence, really. It's not a movement of government reliance. It's a movement dedicated to the individual, not to the collective. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And my first experience, really, with conservatism, it came, like it comes to a lot of people, I think, and I credit former President Ronald Reagan with making me a conservative. It's an interesting story. I had to do a book report. I forget what grade it was. It might have been in middle school. And we were cleaning out our basement back home. The entire family was down in the basement cleaning up. And I found Ronald Reagan's autobiography, An American Life. And I picked it up and I began to read it. And it was truly inspiring. And President Reagan knew that limited government was the best form of government, not runaway Washington spending, not taking away more of our freedoms, but limiting government. And that just resonated with me, and it really made me into a conservative. So I read Ronald Reagan's autobiography. This was at the end of President Bush's years as president, and I just saw the hatred shown by the media and shown by the left for President Bush. An incredible man who's led this country, and I just couldn't believe that there was just so much hatred towards this man, and that really also just made me realize, yeah, I am a conservative. So that was during high school and middle school, and I decided this was in 2010. I was driving by our high school in Pennsylvania, in Berks County, if anybody is from Berks County here, great area in PA. And I noticed at our middle school, we have a middle school in Daniel Boone. It's a beautiful building, incredible building, very expensive. It was way too much money. But they have an American flag and a Pennsylvania flag flying in front of it. And the Pennsylvania flag was light blue. It should be dark blue. We can see it up here on the stage. We can see it over there. It should be dark blue. It was light blue and flying in tatters. Same for the American flag. It was an embarrassment. It was so disrespectful. I went to the school board meeting that night, and I stood up and I said, you need to replace this flag. I pointed the giant flat screen TVs on the wall in the cafeteria, 2 huge plasma flat screen TVs in the cafeteria. And I said, we can afford these TVs, but we can't afford to replace the American flag. I went back to the meeting, the next school board meeting, and the flag was replaced the day after, and that's really what got me interested in the school board and local government. And I just kept going back. I know if anybody's been to a school board meeting, they're not the most exciting places in the world, but I just kept going, and I decided in 2011 that, you know what, I'm going to try to make a difference. I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. I'm going to try to lead my community and lead my schools. And I campaigned on a conservative platform in an area that Barack Obama did very well in 2008 compared to previous years. He carried a few precincts in Amity Township. I campaigned on conservative principles, limiting spending, and controlling and containing the rampant spending in our district, and I won. And this just goes to prove that when you stick, and when we as conservatives and as Republicans, even though I'm sure we're not all Republicans here, when we stick to our principles, we win. It's that simple, we win. Thank you. And it was very interesting. I won the Republican nomination with 48% of the vote in a four-way primary, and my nearest opponent had, I believe, 20%. And I also won the Democratic nomination, which goes to show that conservatism appeals to everybody. It appeals to everybody. I'd like to take a little bit of time to explain, now that I'm on the board, some of the issues that are facing my area specifically. One, I want to talk about Common Core. This is insane. Coming from the federal government, they want to dictate the curriculum in schools across the country. They want to what they want us to do is outsource our sovereignty as a state and our decision-making as local governing bodies to some bureaucrats in Washington. Unaccountable to the people is ridiculous, it's insane, and we need to fight this as best we can. Thank you. And one other thing I want to talk about is property taxes. And where I live in southeastern Pennsylvania, property taxes are out of control. My parents chose to move to the Daniel Boone Area School District in the mid-90s because of the low taxes and the quality education. But since then, taxes have soared, not just in Daniel Boone, but across southeastern Pennsylvania, and really across Pennsylvania in general. And there's just something very wrong with having to pay the government rent to keep your own home and keep your property, because we value private property ownership in Pennsylvania, and you should never have to pay rent to the government to keep your home and to keep your land. So I encourage the state legislature and the governor to take up property tax elimination. It would be great for Pennsylvania. It would spur investment in our state. It would spur business coming to Pennsylvania, because the property tax is arcane, it's out of date, and I hope we can take a leadership role among the nation in eliminating property taxes. So I really hope we can do that. One other thing, I will close my presentation with this. It's very important that we as conservatives try to challenge the status quo. We should always be looking for refreshing and new ways to invigorate and change government, because the other side, there's this belief that we need more government, and we don't. We need smart government, and smart government is less government. So I encourage us all to keep an open mind to new and fresh ideas. I tried to bring a new perspective to the Daniel Boone School Board, and I believe I did. People took a risk. They elected an 18-year-old to the school board. I can understand that maybe makes people nervous. It would make me nervous, too. I mean, but when we stick to conservative principles and conservative values, we win elections, and we do good things. We do good things for everybody. So I would encourage us as conservatives to keep an open mind. And thank you again for having me. It's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Dr. Kurtz. Little question and answer period right now. I want to ask you, first of all, Brittney, what has our generation taught you about leadership, both good and bad?
Luckily, I think that I have had the pleasure of working with, particularly in a lot of the internships that I've done in DC, and working with strong, principled conservatives who are willing to make tough decisions. And in this day and age, it's very easy to just go with what is popular and not to necessarily make the tough decisions. And we see that in Washington all the time, where unfortunately on both sides of the aisle, including conservatives, they go with what is popular as opposed to what we know to be right. And I think I've been blessed in having mentors who constantly supported me, even when something was unpopular, or maybe they disagreed with me, but they knew that I was making a decision that I believed to be correct. I would say one of the things that is a little discouraging would be the inability to adapt with some of the leaders of the generation before me. Times are changing, demographics are changing, and again, as I try to hammer this home, don't change the principles, but if you don't adapt, you don't survive. And so I think that's something that the new generation can bring to the movement.
Let me ask you a further follow-up with that. A lot of people are wrestling right now with immigration. You mentioned that in your opening statement. I was in Washington this week at the Hold Their Feet to the Fire event. I was one of 50 talk show hosts doing my show around the country. And one of the things that people are doing when the immigration bill came out this week is trying to figure out how to retain principles that we are still a nation of laws, and yet at the same time deal with a lot of people coming to this country illegally. It's a very, very tough thing to cross over. What would you answer?
there is no easy answer. It's clearly a very complex, emotional, hot-button issue. And it's difficult to juggle rule of law and principle sovereignty, and then at the same time realizing in the world we live in, we are not going to deport 12 million people. It's realistically not going to happen. It's not a popular thing to say, I realize that, but that's not going to happen. So we have to find some way, some solution that we can get through. And so regardless of whether, we've heard a lot of rhetoric from both sides, and I know a lot of conservatives are very, very unhappy with the current immigration plan that's being proposed by Marco Rubio and the Gang of Eight. But there's something respectable about a guy, Marco Rubio, who's willing to risk his entire political career trying to solve this problem. So my request, don't necessarily have to change your principles. We can disagree on the fine-tuning aspects of the immigration bill, but the rhetoric, it's really turning people off. When I see pictures coming from pundits saying like, oh, Latinos will never be Republicans anyway, so who cares, deport them. That's offensive, and that's turning people off, and that's ultimately hurting our party more than it's helping. So stick to the principles, fight for secure borders. I don't think anyone is actually out there saying, hey, let's have open borders, except for a few fringe libertarians. So yeah, stick with the principles, but maybe watch the marketing and the messaging.
Connor, what has our generation taught you about leadership? Good and bad.
Our generation, you mean your generation? You mean my generation?
Yeah, my generation, I guess. The baby boomer groups.
Okay, yeah.
I'm only 43, so go ahead.
Well, obviously, if we're looking at Washington, I mean, what are we at, $16 trillion in debt? It's my generation that's going to have to pay that off. And we need to have leaders, we have to have conservative leaders who acknowledge that we can't keep spending how we are. And really, I don't want to offend your generation, but your generation really hasn't shown leadership in that area because we are $16 trillion.
By the way, you're safe, Connor. You already had breakfast, so you're in. So go ahead.
Yeah, breakfast is very good, by the way. I'd like to add that. Yeah, so I think that if we look at the leaders like President Ronald Reagan, he was impressive. He's not your generation, a little bit. He's older.
He's older than me.
We have a lot of up-and-coming leaders too in the Republican Party between Marco Rubio, Pat Toomey, Ted Cruz, who's absolutely phenomenal. Ted Cruz is excellent. What a great leader Ted Cruz is. And even I'm talking about. I know Chris Christie, he has had some issues with his conservative credentials, but he's in New Jersey, and he is cutting that government. If you look at New Jersey under John Corzine compared to New Jersey under Governor Christie, it's incredible the changes that are happening. So, and that's important to remember too, I think, as conservatives, that we're not going to necessarily have a Governor Jindal necessarily in New Jersey, because New Jersey is a very Democratic area. But if we can get a governor who can make New Jersey better, that's great for New Jersey. But when it comes to leadership, I'm looking towards people like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, because they are really the leaders, and they're going to be the future leaders of this great country of ours. So,
I want to mention something that John Gizzi mentioned this morning in his talk, that when I was at Washington this week and the Hold Their Feet to the Fire event sponsored by FAIR, the Federation of American Immigration Reform, Marco Rubio came over there on Thursday and addressed them, and he was not very popular. They had buttons out there with his picture on it and so forth, but you must give credit to people who are willing to go in and talk where their message is being kind of bashed down at that particular point. Let me ask you, what are the qualities that you want right now and the leaders that are coming up from your particular vantage point? Connor,
yes, I would love to answer that. One, we need to be able to articulate the conservative message. When we can do that, we win elections. But if you're going to mess up what conservatism is, please don't be a candidate for the Republican Party or the conservative movement. We need to win elections, and we need to stick to our values. So that is obviously something I'm looking towards, somebody who is articulate and can just articulate what conservatism means and explain that really to a new and diverse group of voters as well. That is important. And then, of course, conviction and having the courage of your convictions. Like, just the essence of a political chameleon. Charlie Crist in Florida, deciding to become an independent because he was worried he was going to lose the election to now Senator Marco Rubio. Just what a creep that guy is. I mean, that's the best way to describe it. Like, we can't have leaders like that because they're not leaders. They're out for themselves, and we can't have that, and we can't afford it in this country.
I agree. Conviction of principles, definitely up there. Enthusiasm. Unfortunately, we don't live in a perfect world, and a lot of people out there are drawn to personality. They're drawn to enthusiasm, and that's something that we do have to recognize, is that, you know, I'm not saying run less conservative candidates, but one of the things that some of the younger people that we've mentioned, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, have is not only do they have the courage of their convictions, whether, I know, again, immigration, some people are very divided on, but they also are very charismatic, enthusiastic, and they come off as sincere. And I don't know if you've ever met any of them in person, but they genuinely do seem sincere. And another thing I think is important is the ability to relate to people of different demographics. It's no secret that there is a culture gap that needs to be bridged between the conservative movement and several of the demographics out there. You don't go through an election and not garner more than 25% of any minority category and say that we don't have a problem with the culture gap. So I think having candidates who can also speak to different cultures, different age groups, different demographics is very important. Being able to relate on a personal level, while not the most important thing in a candidate by any means, is also something that is very handy in these recent elections.
There are a lot of people who would say, and I was one of them on the radio, saying the one party is a party of no ideas, the other party is a party of no marketing. So if you are the party of no marketing right now, which is the, I would say, edging of the Republican and maybe even the conservative area, what are they not saying to your generation? And you're not getting it right now. What do they need to say to your generation to get it?
I think, and it's so funny. I don't even know how to particularly articulate that. But yesterday, I think a good example is I came in and I had been here for all of maybe 2 minutes, and I was standing right next to the door, and a peer that I hadn't seen in maybe a year came up to me, gave me a hug, and in hushed tones, said a quick greeting. And I had an older gentleman come up to me and say, "You shouldn't be here. If you're going to be so disrespectful, I want you to leave the conference." And it was so condescending, and I was so taken aback. And I think that was just such like a light bulb moment. Like, this is how we're losing. We aren't communicating, and we need to treat each other more with respect and understanding. And yes, I think that we as a younger generation have a problem showing respect to our elders. But at the same time, I think a lot of times the youth are being written off as, "Oh, you're too young, you don't bring anything to the table." And the youth want a seat at the table. We have something to say, we have new ideas, we want to help.
And I agree with that. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I mean, I experienced it firsthand in Daniel Boone. "Oh, he's too young. What does he know?" Well, I do know that you don't spend more than you take in, and you just can't keep spending more every year. I would think that's a self-evident truth, but a lot of people don't understand that for some reason. I would like to also mention, your question was, how do we market conservatism to new voters? I would like to phrase the debate and the argument, really, look at the size and where we stand. We favor less government and limited government. The other side favors out-of-control government and out-of-control spending. The choice is obvious. Americans want limited government, and young people do too. We don't want a bureaucrat in Washington deciding on our schools' curriculums, like I mentioned earlier with Common Core. It's just, we want liberty and we want freedom, and that's what we as Americans want. That's what our country is founded upon, and that's what we need. And I think when we sell that to young Americans, it's very easy for them to ascribe to conservative viewpoints because it's what we are. We are advocates of limited government. So I think that's a good way to really phrase and articulate conservatism.
Connor, I suspect there are a lot of people sitting out there right now that are sitting there going, "You do," but do the majority of Connors want that out there? Do the majority of Brittneys want that out there? You both attend schools. You both have attended school. Many of us have the perception, at least, that colleges are not exactly on the side of conservatism, okay? Is that the case, first of all? And secondly, if they're not teaching you about conservative principles and American principles, then where do you go to find those, Brittney?
Do you really want to open that can of worms?
Absolutely.
I'm
a talk show host. I love those kind of things. Go ahead.
If you're not familiar, I worked with the Leadership Institute and Morton Blackwell's organization, and I ran Campus Reform, which actually highlights liberal abuses on college campuses. And you see it firsthand. I mean, these professors are left-wing, not liberal. They are left-wing nut jobs. They are flat-out Marxists, flat-out promoting insane feminism. The stuff that you hear in college campuses is mind-blowing. And I don't think a lot of parents realize that. Students are going off and being indoctrinated. That's just the truth. The problem is, I think, you know, Jose Marti once said that man loves freedom even if he does not know that he loves it. He will flee from where it does not exist and run to where it does. I think the problem with a lot of minority demographics and youth is that they do not know that they love freedom. They have never been exposed to conservative movement, conservative principles, or had it broken down in a way that they understand why they need it. And so I think a lot of them, especially in various, you know, Latino communities, Black communities, they actually do support entitlements. They do support bigger government because they don't know any better, pretty much. We're not out there educating, and that's what we need to do, is we need to go out and educate on what our principles actually are in order for them to embrace it. So, yes, colleges are liberal bastions.
So where do they go to find those principles you mentioned?
That's the thing. We need to be out there promoting it to them. It's hard on a college campus. Even the, I mean, I don't know if you feel the same way, but even the college Republicans at GW, I considered relatively moderate. So it's difficult to find conservative information, resources. You can't get conservative speakers on a college campus. I write to GW multiple times a year as an alumna saying, I will never donate until you bring a conservative speaker. Stop bringing the head of the NAACP. Stop bringing Michelle Obama. Stop bringing these people. Bring in a conservative, just once. They won't.
Connor, you're a freshman in college. Now you went from Berks County to Catholic University in D.C.
Yeah.
Obviously, culture shock, I would imagine.
Oh, definitely. Washington, D.C. is just, I mean, there are precincts in Washington, D.C. where Mitt Romney received 6 votes and Barack Obama received 2,500. And if we're talking about voter fraud, and that's happened in Pennsylvania too, in Philadelphia. And if somehow we're not allowed, we can't show a photo ID, asking for that is racist. When you have Eric Holder, the head of the Justice Department, he requires 2 photo IDs to see him speak. But when you want to vote, he's out there fighting for voter ID, he's fighting against voter ID laws, which are common sense measures. You should have to show an ID to vote. It makes sense. But yeah, definitely, I mean, that's just one thing. And I like to say that I go to school in D.C., but I'm not of D.C. I'm not of the fabric of D.C. because Washington is just, it's broken. And when you look, I keep alluding to the $16 trillion because it's terrifying. And I don't know if my generation realizes that. We are indebted to foreign nations, we're indebted to, we're not self-reliant. When you're $16 trillion in debt, how can you truly be free? You can't. And I just think that it's crazy. But Berks County is a much more welcoming place, I think, than Washington, D.C., a much more friendly place. And it's a beautiful place. And I encourage you, start up a business in Amity Township. We'll really welcome you. We could really use the tax revenue for the Danube Area School District.
Shameless self-promotion. He's good
Definitely.
at this at an early age, right? Final question, 30 seconds each. Our conversation in America today has become very polarized. We have people saying, I believe A, someone says, I believe B, next person says, you're an idiot. Okay, that's the end of the conversation. How do we make the conversation in America better? 30 seconds.
Ooh, that's rough. I think there's a saying that I get told. I like to talk a lot. I'm very opinionated. And I heard this one time. It was, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You should listen twice as much as you speak. And I think if conservatives, and, well, everyone, but in particular, we can't control what other people do. We can only control how we react and our actions. If we start listening to what other people are saying and really understanding where they are coming from, we can tell them how conservative principles can help them. If we listen to the single mother of 6 who lives, you know, on Berry Hill or Derry Street, I'm not too familiar with other cities in the state, so I'm using local references, and what she needs. We can tell her how conservatism can help her, but we need to start that dialogue.
Connor?
I think it's important that we always keep in mind the people who we are debating and we are arguing with in the political sphere. I always assume that they have the best interests of America at heart. I believe, like Barack Obama, I think he means well. I just think he's terribly misguided, and I don't think he understands what he's talking about all the time. But I do think people generally mean well. And I think it's helpful that we adopt that mindset when we're engaging in debate. And we do want to change minds, we do want to change opinions. And calling names isn't the answer to do that. I mean, in Daniel Boone, I could have easily been dismissed. He's just an 18-year-old. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And a lot of people did dismiss me. But we need to keep an open mind. And I'm glad Daniel Boone did, and I hope we all can do that. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you both very much. Connor Kurtz, Brittney Morrett, ladies and gentlemen. I think we've got some pretty good ideas coming your way for the future. Don't forget to take time this morning to vote on the straw poll. Thank you very much for being with us in our session. We're going to turn around here and start the next session very, very soon.